Good afternoon, everyone. Please welcome to the stage guest speaker, Professor Brian J. Ford.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome everybody to the first of my Christmas talks. I'm a scientist, published a lot of research in everything from Nature and New Scientist to Scientific American and the British Medical Journal, but I'm also an author. My 30 or so books have come out in over 140 editions around the world. And I've done a lot of television, including hosting programs on several channels and on, I think, all of the global networks now. And I'm a columnist. I began as a columnist, writing for a newspaper, as a student when I was 20. And I currently write regularly for Laboratory News and also a column in an American journal called The Microscope. And I'm a radio broadcaster, introduced national radio science program on a Saturday morning, Science Now, which some of you may remember years ago, and appeared on the Today program and Woman's Hour and everywhere else you can think of. And in fact, I've never listed those things before in public, and I feel so exhausted I need to lie down to realize that all that has happened. But what I'm going to do today is look at the science of Christmas. What are we celebrating and why? Now, the easy answer to that is we are celebrating the 2024th year since our Lord was born. Well, that can't be right because of this chap, King Herod. Now, as you know, King Herod, according to the Bible, was alive when Jesus was born. King Herod actually died about 4 BC. So we know that the 2024 can't be right. Second thing is, of course, that you had the shepherds watching their flocks by night at the time. Well, that's not going to work either, because the night time in December in that part of the world is cold and snowy, and they don't have sheep out at that time. Not only that, but it doesn't work for agriculture either, because the shepherds would have been out in their fields. Now, there are fields between Bethlehem and Beit Samur, which does have grazing land, but they take the crops in August or so, and they start ploughing in October. So it's only in that period that the shepherds would have been watching their flocks by night on those fields. Not only that, but we know that Jesus was conceived about 6 months after Passover, so he must have been born sometime in the autumn, several years BC. Now, you notice I'm saying BC, not BCE. These days people say BCE, before the Common Era, because not everybody would believe in Christ. That's ridiculous. The Common Era is set at when we nominally think Jesus was born. So just renaming it doesn't alter that. And why people use these ridiculous expressions like BCE when BC suits us all is entirely beyond me, so I'm not going to do that. I'm going to stick with the original, if that's all right with you. There are so many other celebrations that take place in December. And that's what we have to address. Why December, if that's when Jesus certainly wasn't born? Well, Lohri is this Punjabi celebration. And that marks the life of a man in the 1400s called Tullah Bhatti, who was an extraordinary campaigner. This is 500 years ago, and yet this great man in the Punjabi tradition campaigned against slave labor of children and campaigned against the forced marriage of young teenage girls. That's the kind of campaigning that you'd have nowadays. And he did it 500 years ago. So when they celebrate their annual December tradition, actually it's slipped back gradually, and it's going to, I think it's on the 14th of January in 2025. But when they celebrate the name of that great man, I join with them in celebrating. He was obviously quite a dude. And then, of course, we have Diwali, that we all know, that also celebrates the dark days of winter. And Diwali now, of course, is a month or so before Christmas, so it hardly counts. It's now the end of October. But it all stems from the ancient Roman tradition of Saturnalia. Saturnalia was a great feast. It lasted for 12 days. Notice, 12 days, and we have the 12 days of Christmas. That dates right back to the ancient Romans. It originally started on the 17th of December, and then it moved to the 23rd of December, and they gave gifts, and they feasted, and they partied, and they did bugger all work as far as they possibly could. And that was the whole point, was in the middle of the dark days of winter, with these great long nights, they would just make merry and be kind to each other. And of course, you've also got Hanukkah, which the Jews celebrate. That starts on the 25th of December and runs through till the 2nd of January. And that dates back at least to 164 BC. So there are lots of celebrations going on this time of year because it's the middle of winter. We're actually celebrating the winter solstice. Religions have always been a dab hand at kidnapping other people's existing celebrations and claiming them for themselves. So, for example, Christmas is really the winter solstice, which has been celebrated for probably tens of thousands of years. Easter is really the vernal equinox, and that also has been celebrated for a long, long time. Then, of course, you have the harvest festival, which is really the autumn. You see, when religions come along, they often take existing traditions and adapt them to the new situation and the new set of beliefs. And that's why it is that we celebrate Christmas in the middle of December. This is a tremendous feast that they hold in Persia, Iran. Have you seen, there are persimmons, watermelons, pomegranates. These fruits were stored and eaten in the middle of winter. And they had this tremendous celebration called Yalda, all to do with the worship of the sun god. And medieval Christmas really grew out of the Saturnalia, the 12 days tradition. But it goes back a lot further than that. I mean, just think, when you're a primitive society and you've been out enjoying the summer in Europe, and suddenly the days begin to get shorter and shorter, and you become more and more perturbed, the nights lengthen, and you notice that the sun, which was rising there a couple of weeks ago, is rising there, and then it's rising there, and it's not rising so high in the sky. And there came a day when that all turned around. There came a day when suddenly the days began to lengthen and the sun began to rise slightly further north each day. And obviously, tens of thousands of years ago, perhaps hundreds of thousands of years ago, people noticed that that was an annual change. And they got the sense of marking the shortest day and, of course, the longest day. I was out in Karnak, and I was intrigued to find that Karnak, this temple in ancient Egypt, is aligned with the solstice. And here is a picture taken on the 21st of June, solstice day, and the sun rises exactly right the way along through this great stone tunnel. And wherever you look around Europe, you find similar markers of the solstice. This is the ring of Brodgar. I mean, Jan and I have walked around these stones, and there is something spiritual about them. You cannot just regard them as hunks of limestone stuck up on end. They really have something that's been going on for tens of thousands of years. And of course, the greatest one of all, 5,000 years old, is Stonehenge. And everybody loves Stonehenge. When the kids were little, the big kids, they're beginning to retire now, but when the big kids were little, we'd run around Stonehenge and they'd climb and sit on these stones. You can't bloody well go near it now. I mean, Americans come and think, oh, we'll go and see Stonehenge, and that's all the view they get. Why on earth the authorities don't let people walk around it, I shall never know. I cannot imagine that when it stood there with people trampling all around it for 5,000 years, that a few tourists running around and patting the stones affectionately and taking selfies is necessarily going to completely ruin the whole thing. But, and this is where it gets interesting, if we're celebrating the middle of winter, we don't necessarily celebrate only the good things, because there are ancient traditions which brought bad to that time of year. And one of them is the Krampus celebration. Krampus was a mythical beast, half man, half goat. And Krampus would scare Krampus would frighten. Krampus would frighten little children if they didn't behave themselves. And Krampus is still celebrated in Norway. This is the Krampus presentation. Look at that. Aren't they hideous and terrifying? Now, you know, you talk about the Norsemen, the Vikings, and they say, no, they never had twin horns sticking out of their their helmets. We never found any. They may not have found them, but when you see ancient celebrations like this going on, even though these are held on with arrowdite, I'm sure, but I'm not convinced that those ancient Vikings didn't have helmets with horns on them. But these are quite terrifying processions. And in fact, Krampus night is actually the 5th of December, which is a bit early for the song. But nonetheless, it is an extraordinary, frightening process. And it's spreading. This is the Krampus run in Whitby in Yorkshire. It started in 2013 and is now fast growing and becoming one of the most popular northern traditional celebrations. I say traditional celebrations there is. But you get Krampus all over Europe. Here it is in Munich. There again, there is Krampus, these hideous half-man, half-goat figures. At least this has St. Nicholas in the middle. And many of the celebrations took the fact that it was the middle of dark winter and made the light arrive, like the celebration of St. Lucia, which is very popular throughout Scandinavia. This is the celebration of St. Lucia in Sweden. It's now held on the 13th of December, so it's a week or so away from the actual solstice. But they have the same in Italy, they have the same in Hungary, they have it in Malta. There are many countries that celebrate St. Lucia. And it all goes back to the festival of Yule, which is a pagan festival. It is an ancient pagan festival. Now, I have no patience with people who say we should call it Winterval in case we offend a non-Christian. Or they say, Happy Holidays instead of Merry Christmas. I will not have any of it, and I'll tell you why. This is a lecture about the science of Christmas, not the religion of Christmas. It is the science of Christmas. And you must have scientific evidence. And the reason I don't think it's justified is this. They would say, we don't like to use the word Christmas because it might offend non-Christians. And the whole Winterval idea is basically to cancel Christmas. Just imagine that we went on a tour to India and we were looking forward to Diwali and the fireworks and the lights, and they said, oh, we're awfully sorry, we've cancelled it in case we offended the Christians. We'd have spent all that money to go and join in the celebration, and nobody would show us anything. The people who come to Britain because we're not where they come from. They come to Britain because of our traditions. And the way I can prove that it's wrong is this. Those people, if they're not going to use the word Christmas, can't also use the days of the week. Sunday is the day when we worship the sun god, Mithras. Monday is the day when we worship the moon. It's Moon Day. Tuesday is when we worship, or it was coined because of the worship, of Tyr, who was he was the Scandinavian equivalent of Mars, the god of war and justice. Wednesday, strange spelling, because it's Woden's Day, that ancient pagan god. Thursday is Thor's Day. Friday is devoted to Freya. Saturday is, of course, Saturn's Day. Now, if people are going to say, I don't like to use the word Christmas in case you bugger off, you use the days of the week, and that doesn't mean to say that you would consider yourself a pagan. Christmas is what the day's called, and it celebrates. It doesn't mark the birth of Jesus Christ, but it celebrates the fact that Jesus Christ was born. And whether you're religious or not, the whole notion that you mark these dark days of winter with something as symbolic as the birth of a little baby who is going to grow up to espouse love and forgiveness and charity and gentleness and kindness and selflessness, that's just a wonderful thought. You don't have to be a Christian and go to church every Sunday for it. And of course, much of what we celebrate isn't very Christian anyway. We have decorations. Now, Roman Catholics amongst you will very likely have a plaster or a plastic crib. I've seen it in many homes, but most homes don't. We have decorations and lights. What we're celebrating has gone back for tens of thousands of years. We're celebrating the ancient traditions of Yule. And that's why Christmas is so important. And Christmas Day varies where you go. In Norwegian, by the way, Christmas is on the 24th, not the 25th. We're there on the 23rd and the 24th. And the 24th is not their Christmas Eve. The 23rd is their Christmas Eve. The 24th is actually their Christmas Day. We hold it on the 25th of December. And the Armenian Apostolic Church has it on the 6th of January. The Eastern Orthodox have it on the 7th. And the Julian calendar also applies to the ancient Armenian Church on the 19th. Because they don't have leap years, it has slipped back in time a little bit. So why actually that date? Well, this is the chap who did it, Pope Julius I. He decided that since people had been celebrating Mithras, the sun god, on the 25th of December, that is when we would mark the birth of Jesus. The legends of Mithras has things in common with Jesus. Mithras was supposed to be a virgin birth. Mithras was supposed to have been resurrected after his death. So the two legends seem to twine together quite well. By the late 1300s, this is one of the earliest paintings of the birth of Jesus Christ, the Vision of St. Bridget. Isn't it a beautiful painting? And I do want you to look at this. This is from Lorenzo Monaco. Now, this was painted in 1422. It's in the Uffizi Gallery in Florence. Now, it's a great painting, but just look at those people in the middle. That doesn't look like something old. It almost looks like a modern, contemporary piece of art, doesn't it? It is quite remarkable how much the Nativity inspired artists and brought out the best in them. Here's another wonderful example. This chap, Girardiano, he had Michelangelo as his apprentice. He taught the man to have this serene, beautiful painting. And as the centuries unwound, this is from the court painter to King Louis XIV in France, painted in the 1600s. And this is Charles Le Brun who painted it. It's a wonderful painting. Now, the skeptics amongst you will have thought to yourselves, well, I've heard rumors that Jesus was actually a concatenation of earlier traditions and never actually existed. And it is quite popular to say that Jesus might have been a myth. Now, as a humble scientist, I'm stuck with facts. And here, for example, is the oldest document that's ever been found, written in AD 43, and this is an epistle of St. Paul. This is a copy, and it's in Greek, so it's not the original. But this is only a couple of decades after Jesus was crucified, and that mentions him. Then you've got a nice example here. Here was a man who was a historian, wrote about the Trojan War, and he mentioned Jesus. Here's another example, Josephus. He also wrote about Jesus in 66 AD. Here we go again. Serapion wrote about the existence of Jesus. You know, people do say nobody ever wrote about the existence of Jesus Christ, and it simply isn't good enough to say we believe in someone. You need to have evidence. But many of these writers alluded to the existence of Jesus Christ. It's really quite an extraordinary fact to look back at them. I mean, Pliny the Younger, Pliny the Older wasn't his dad. Pliny the Elder was his uncle. And he wrote all about how Christians were being persecuted. This was a court official under Emperor Hadrian, who built Hadrian's Wall. And he wrote about Christianity too. And so within the first century or so, you've got plenty of people writing about Jesus Christ and Christianity. And it doesn't do to try and pretend he doesn't exist. You've got to be objective and scientific, and there is plenty of documentation to say that, oh yes, Jesus as a person was certainly real. This is the earliest document that's actually been found that mentioned Jesus, and this is from 230 AD. It mentioned, and they recently discovered in Israel, they were expanding a prison, the Megiddo prison, and they came across this extraordinarily preserved mosaic. And I can't make head or tail of it myself, but scholars insist that this actually mentions Jesus, and that's in an ancient Roman mosaic from about 230 AD. So what about the Star of Bethlehem? Well, there have been many theories about that. Some people have said it might have been a conjunction because there was an alignment between Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. That was in 6 BC. And there was another one between Jupiter and Venus in 2 BC. But that's a bit esoteric. You want something big and spectacular in the sky, so it might well have been a comet. And there were several comets at that time. There was one in March of 5 BC, another one in April of 4 BC, and Halley's Comet itself came round in 2 BC. So it might well have been a comet that people were following. And who was following the star? Why? Those 3 wise men. Now, we've rather forgotten this. These days, Islam is always seen almost as the enemy of Christianity. But the 2 religions are cousins. And 1,000 years ago, we in Europe were besotted with religion and religious wars, whereas the Muslim scholars were advancing science and medicine and astronomy in an extraordinary way. And the 3 wise men were Persians. They came from Persia. And there is indeed plenty of evidence that wise men did come to visit notaries at that time. And the so-called legend of the 3 wise men is quite likely, although, of course, it's not an accurate historic record in detail, but there is no reason to doubt that 3 wise men didn't come. And why were Mary and Joseph and Jesus there in the first place? Because of the census. Again, it's fashionable these days to say, Mary and Joseph, they were refugees. Just like, no, they were not refugees. They lived in an area where they were summoned to go and attend the census. It was an official visit. When they got there, of course, they established that great tradition that's gone on ever since. You can never find a bloody hotel room at Christmas. And that is the truth of the matter. They were not refugees. They were turning up for a regular administrative procedure that happened from time to time. And here is an early drawing of the taking of a census. So what were they like? Well, this is an example I photographed in Brazil. And people always like to make out any of their religious subjects of faith to be like them. And so here is Mary, looking very European and suitably virginal. And here is the noble and refined carpenter. He can't possibly have looked like that. These were Middle Eastern people. They were Arabs following the Jewish faith. And one of the earliest renditions of what Jesus was like is actually this in the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. And, of course, he looks a bit Turkish because, of course, this is a mosque in Turkey. And that's how they drew him. What did Jesus actually look like? He could have looked like Yasser Arafat. We like to think of him as being beautiful and European, but he would have been Middle Eastern, obviously. He had the olive skin and the dark hair. And so far as we can tell, this is probably vaguely like what Jesus looked like. And, of course, his teachings have come down to us. And it's quite remarkable how he eschewed any hint of violence or anything of the sort. I don't know whether you know this, but Muslims, when they say the name of the prophet, they always say, peace be upon him. They also say it when they mention the name of Jesus. And if you read the Quran, you will find a number of surahs which contain references to the Prophet Muhammad saying, follow the teachings of Jesus, because Jesus was the greatest of the prophets. These 2 religions were very, very close. And it's quite remarkable that now we see them as though they were poles apart. So how did we celebrate Christmas? Well, you had this singing, and the Eastern Church had regular Christmas singing from about the year 760. Carols actually appeared a few centuries later, and they were in regular use from about 1320. And many of the carols that we now sing, like God rest ye merry gentlemen, and Ding Dong Medley on high, and shepherds watched their flocks by night. Many of those go back to the medieval times, and we've sung them ever since. Santa came round our village the other day, and they were playing sort of rock and rolly things and swing. And I thought, where's the carol? This is supposed to be, Christmas time. And it's wonderful to think that some of those carols, so familiar to all of us, date back for hundreds and hundreds of years. But, as I say, we don't actually celebrate Christmas in a religious way, when you stop to think about it. The main focus of our Christmas is this man, St. Nicholas, born in the year 270. He had very wealthy parents, and he resolved that he was going to give away all his wealth to benefit the poor. He actually took part in that great meeting, the Council of Nicaea, in 325 AD. He was a leading founding Christian. And early portrayals of him always show him as a white-bearded, benevolent man in a red coat. Now, Coca-Cola have always liked to pretend that they are the ones who popularized Santa Claus. And time again, you will see red Santa and red Coke, and the two are linked together, and they have encouraged the view that it's Coca-Cola who gave us Santa. Oh, no, they didn't. What about St. Nicholas in the Netherlands, who goes back centuries? There was a book about him published in 1850, which made him immediately popular throughout the Low Countries. And I've gone back and I've had a look. Trudge back there to 1886, and there is totally recognizable Santa. Here is Harper's Weekly with Santa on the front cover from 1863, long before Coca-Cola was thinking of the idea. And indeed, Kris Kringle has a quite ancient lineage as well. This is the earliest one I found, and that takes us back to 1822. And there is Santa, recognizable. And the first ever Christmas movie was made in 1898 by an Englishman called George E. Smith. He was a conjurer and a ventriloquist and a stage man, but he was a great experimenter with the movies. He had a cine camera, and he loved making special little short movies. And he made a film with Santa in 1898, and the Santa is totally recognizable in today's terms. This is Smith, interesting man, and here is his movie. Now, you can see how the bed and the door are jerking about. So I've restored it a little for you to steady them up. There we are, that's better. And there you see the maid is putting the children to bed. The door is just painted on the scenery rather than being a real door, and the game is rather given away by the maid, because after she's tucked the kiddies up and kissed them goodnight, she turns out the gas lamp and doesn't walk out of the door, exit stage left. But there is Santa, 1898, in the first ever Christmas film ever made. Isn't that amazing? And perfectly recognizable in today's terms. And indeed, Santa, pre-Coca-Cola Santa, was widely used in advertisements. This is from a garage in the 1920s. And more recently, of course, Santa has re-emerged in other guises. And this is from the McCann Agency. They've got advertising offices all around the world. They are the people who thought up the tiger in your tank. That's still a famous advertising slogan. And that was their view. But what about the traditions that we have in our houses? Kissing under mistletoe. Mistletoe, Viscum album. It's a most interesting plant. It's parasitic, and yet it's green. It can photosynthesize, so it could look after itself, but this cheeky little plant grows on trees as a parasite, on hawthorn, lime, poplar, ash, apple, rowan. And what's interesting is that if ever you want to grow mistletoe from a berry, you have to get a berry from a particular tree and plant the berry into the bark of the same species of tree. If you get a berry from a poplar infested with mistletoe and plant it on apple, it won't work. You've got to plant it on another poplar. You can actually buy apple trees in specialist dealers with mistletoe already growing. But of course, when the mistletoe takes over, it actually destroys the tree. It's a fascinating plant. It was used by the ancients for all sorts of medical purposes. And in recent years, we have begun to find that it may have anti-cancer drugs in it, which is an extraordinary thought. Then, of course, you've got holly, Ilex aquifolium. Holly is dioecious. Male and female trees are separate. So you've got a holly tree and it's never had berries, it's a male. Now, the best way to get holly is to take a cutting, because then you know what you're getting. And the problem with holly, with the youngsters around, is of course that it's covered with prickles. Now, holly is no fool. Most plants are more intelligent and clever than we realize. And as holly grows above reaching distance, it stops wasting energy on making prickles and makes smooth leaves instead. And so every natural holly tree that's grown from a berry has very prickly leaves in the grazing area, but go up 10 or 20 feet, and the leaves only have one little prickle on the end, which hardly matters. So, my advice to you is this. If you want holly in your garden, go to a holly covered in red berries, because you know it's a female, get up a ladder, and take a cutting from near the top. Because then when you grow it, you'll have a thornless holly plant without all those prickles all over. That's worth remembering. What about ivy? The holly and the ivy, heterohelix. This is ivy. For some odd reason, ivy has always been associated with the Antichrist. No idea where that originally came from. But ivy is not very popular. You don't see ivy in garlands as much as you do holly and mistletoe. Then there's this plant, discovered by a man called Joel Poncet, who was the first American ambassador to Mexico in the 1800s. That's poinsettia, with those little tiny red bracts. This is how you see it in garden centers, and this is because it's been scientifically adjusted. It is raised with growth retardants, which stop the stems from lengthening, and with hormones that encourage the bracts to grow big. So this is what the natural plant is like. But after we've selected it and treated it, that's what it becomes. You never think that's natural. And they, of course, are not red petals. They're red leaves. They're bracts. The flowers are the little tiny creamy dots in the middle. And what about the Christmas tree? The highlight of everybody's Christmas. People these days don't hang up garlands anymore. And the reason is, of course, because you've got to put a little nail in the corner of the room. I would say to all of you, next time you're decorating your living room, put some cup hooks up near the ceiling on which you can hang your garlands every Christmas. We live in an old thatched house with wooden beams, and along every beam, although the hooks are small and they're the same color as the beam so no one ever sees them, we've got hooks. So we can hang garlands up as much as we want. And garlands really do make Christmas look good. The original Christmas tree is Picea abies. You'll recognize that in close-up. These days, few people buy that one because it drops its needles. If you do grow a tree, then it needs to stand in water like any cut plant. But these days, people grow spruce trees, all kinds of other trees, because they don't drop the needles. But that's the traditional one. And it does date back a long, long, long way. Here's a picture from 1510. That's Martin Luther's Christmas tree in Riga, in Latvia. And we all think that it was Victoria and Albert who brought the Christmas tree in 1841, but it wasn't true. You can go back to Queen Charlotte, the German wife of King George III, and she actually had a decorated Christmas tree, and that dates from 1800. So, what about Christmas greetings? That is the first ever Christmas card. We get a card printed. Do you know, we had our Christmas card printed this year. Each card cost 65p, have it printed in full colour. You'd spend more than that on a card that you buy in a box. And people like our cards. And they even turned up once on TV.
But there is one card that I love getting from a dear friend of mine who is a professor, and he takes every Christmas, has a fantastic family, and he's such a wonderful person. Professor Brian Ford, his name is, and he has all his family there, so he has children, grandchildren and great-grandchildren, and they take a family photo at Christmas time, and then they put that on the card for the next Christmas, if that makes sense. It's not staged. That's really lovely.
I really, really like it, and I think e-cards all right. It saves you a lot of money, but it's not the same.
No, e-cards aren't the same. And of course, you can't trust an e-card. If an e-card comes, you think, is this in actual fact somebody sending me a virus? But yes, I like taking photographs at Christmas. This is one of the first photographs that we took when the big kids were little. That's in the 60s. Here's one from 40 years ago. And I'm just looking at it, we can remember the day. I mean, when you see these people now as sort of balding grown-ups, then one's heart goes out to the happy memories that we had when they were all young. And the last time, because we have quite a big family, the last time we had a chunk of the family in the house was a decade ago, and at that time I said, we're not going to do this again. I would recommend all of you to do that. As we get older, we do tend to fall into a pattern where the family comes to us for Christmas. The family who come and visit, they always have done. They'll alternate between you and the in-laws. No, no, no. There comes a time in life when you think to yourself, bugger it, I need time to myself. And it's time that they invited you over. So this is the last time that we had a lot of the family in the house. And we loved it. And I will never do it again. Now, e-cards, I agree, are a bit rubbish. But it did occur to me a couple of years ago that what Jan and I might do would be to make a video card, quick 20-second video card. And so this is the card that we made.
December 2022. It's all yours, darling.
Sorry. To wish you a very Merry Christmas.
And a Happy New Year.
And I may say, ladies and gentlemen, that is from both of us our wish to you on this wonderful Scandinavian cruise. Thank you for coming today, and see you on Christmas Day, I hope. Thank you.